Hi, everyone. Mike Lonergan from Georgia Oak here, welcoming you to our latest edition of Mic'd Up. Earlier this week, I was fortunate enough to have an important conversation about organizational diversity. My guests were Don D. Bennett-Alexander, an employment law professor and diversity thought leader at the University of Georgia, and Yendelela Holston, a partner and the chief diversity officer at Kilpatrick, Townsend. While watching the news a few months back, I saw a protest sign that really resonated with me. It said, "Not being racist is not enough." I found it profound because I believe it well captures a simple truth that on a personal and societal level, a mere absence of racism is an unacceptable standard. When looking at the business standard, I think most leading companies in America would agree that an absence of racism is a standard that must be far exceeded. We will share our conversation in two parts. Today, we'll share part one, in which we cover unintentional biases in the workplace, systemic issues that give rise to the need for proactive diversity, and why being colorblind is not good enough. Again, my guests were Dawn D. Bennett-Alexander. She is an associate professor of employment law at UGA. Dr. B.A. literally wrote the book on employment law, co-authoring the leading employment law textbook in the country, which helped give rise to the field. Dr. B.A. was a graduate of Howard Law School, as well as the University of D.C. Dr. B.A. was my most influential professor at UGA, and I was fortunate enough to have her twice. Dr. B.A. and I were joined by Yendelela Holston, again, a partner and the chief diversity officer of Kilpatrick Townsend, an international law firm headquartered here in Atlanta. Yendelela advises clients through all aspects of the employee relationship. She is a graduate of Duke University Law School and Furman University. Now, without further ado, I present to you part one of our conversation on organizational diversity. Today, we are sharing our first edition of a three-part series on organizational diversity. In order to prioritize diversity programs, it would be logical to understand why these programs are needed. I am speaking with several executives and owners of businesses that see themselves as colorblind. Said another way, that they aren't making hiring decisions based on race nor gender. But Dr. B.A., why is it that being colorblind at the hiring decision is not enough to drive diversity?
Yeah. I'm going to read you a couple of things, Mike, that may actually ring a bell with you. They are questions. Why are many African Americans so religious? And is it okay for a white person to come to a black church? Where does the stereotype that black people don't like dogs come from? Why are black people afraid of dogs? Why are African Americans afraid of water? Why are black women so loud when talking to each other in public? These questions come from people who thought they were absolutely colorblind and really had to search themselves for even being able to ask a question. The importance of that is to show you that we think we're colorblind and it doesn't matter, but as it turns out, it really does. We have things in our head that impact, and this is why this is so important, that impact our ability to make what we would think of as otherwise objective kinds of decisions. And I have students ask these questions and just sort of search their minds for being able to do it. And we discuss it in class because these are people that are getting ready to go out into a workplace and be the ones who make these kinds of decisions. And knowing what's in your head and how to avoid what will come if you don't know what's in your head, that is when you think you're colorblind, ends up being a really important place because nothing magic happens between the time they get that diploma and the time they show up in a workplace. So they will end up, and I see it all the time, and I know you have too, Yendelela, they end up making decisions with this stuff in their head that they think they're colorblind about, and they simply aren't. And those things mean that you are not intentionally discriminating against someone, but you could end up in a lawsuit anyway.
All right. Well,
hey, can I weigh in here?
Yeah,
Sorry,
absolutely.
Mike.
Absolutely.
I was also going to say, in addition to what Dr. B.A. said, let's hypothetically say that people are colorblind, which she's laid out the case as to why none of us are. The systems in place mean that colorblind isn't enough anyway. So even if you were colorblind, you need policies in order to overcome systems which have made your pool of candidates and made the people who are likely to come to your doors different. And so you don't have to intentionally be discriminating against people, because if you're not intentionally not doing it, or if you're not intentionally trying to overcome these systems, the status quo is going to do the work for you.
Yep.
Right, right. So I think, Yendelela, what you're saying is that while there might not be that intention of discrimination throughout the hiring decision, it takes more than that. The hiring decision is too late. The funnel of candidates, in order to be representative, needs to be expanded. Is that right? Through proactive action?
Yes.
Yes.
That, in addition to checking all of the things that Dr. BA said and making sure you're aware of them in yourself and in your organization and in your hiring managers.
Right. What are some policies that you're seeing some companies are doing or not doing that are meaning that their funnel, their candidate pool, is not representative of the general population?
So let's look at a couple of things as to what you think about for a candidate or what makes a good candidate. So let's say hypothetically you focus on education. So on this call, we all have very nice pedigrees. That's a luxury. So there are plenty of very, very smart people who can afford to go to these schools and or haven't had the opportunities that will allow these schools to open their doors to them. And so focusing on schools, which also historically have been very discriminatory. So we call historically Black universities and predominantly white institutions, and it should probably be reversed, because historically Black universities never excluded anyone. So I think it's predominantly Black universities and historically white institutions. And so people could not even go to these schools. And so you don't even have the legacy of family to get you in the door if you could afford it. And then let's talk about the other issues of socioeconomic status. So you get into one of these schools. I look at myself, for example. I could not afford an unpaid internship at any point. I worked 5 jobs during undergrad, and I needed to be paid during my summers as well. So that meant I couldn't go to Capitol Hill. I couldn't do certain other things where they're expecting you to provide free labor for experience. So if you're then looking for this type of experience on a resume, you've excluded people unintentionally, although you were colorblind. Right.
Right. Dr. B.A., you want to add anything to that? I'm sure that you've seen in a lot of working with companies throughout the years, you've seen this unintentional lack of diversity. What would you say to those business owners that were trying to look further at that and look out for things that they may inadvertently be practicing?
I would say become conscious about it. I mean, there's no way to deal with it without being conscious about it. And I think May 25th, what we saw with Amy Cooper in Central Park and what we saw with George Floyd and Derek Chauvin showed us that the system operates whether you realize that you're a part of it or not. Both of those people would have got up. In fact, Amy did say, both of them said, I'm not racist. Being racist is not the issue. We live in a system which privileges certain kinds of people. I just had a discussion with an old student last night who said, I feel like I'm poor, I was white, I grew up that way, and I worked for everything I have. And there is no doubt that you did. The thing about it is, so did Black folk, but they still didn't manage to get where they needed to be because of systems that were built in. So for companies that are trying to do something about that, I think it becomes very important to be okay with being uncomfortable about having the discussion and even the thoughts about race and other marginalized populations that you don't have represented in your workplace, and decide that you want to do something about it. And the decision alone is a big thing. How you make that decision, what you make that decision on the basis of becomes really important, because it's going to guide what it is that you do. So becoming conscious and aware and deciding that you're intentionally going to do something about it, as opposed to just standing there and saying, I'm not being racist and I don't need to do anything because I want to be colorblind, that simply is not enough. You're going to have to be proactive about this. There are things that you can and should do in order to make your workplaces more representative. And that's really all we're talking about. What Yendelela said was extremely important. Those are systems that operate without you thinking about it. So if you're looking at that application and you don't see that internship, I have students all the time who say, I couldn't afford to take that internship without being paid for it. Well, you look on the resume, all you're doing as the person who's looking at the resume is saying, well, one had an internship that was, a pretty good internship paid, the other one doesn't. You're not thinking about the reasons for that. And those reasons are why you need to be intentional about what you're doing. Asking about that, asking about what difference, what the different experiences are that people bring to something, so that you're not using the sort of shortened version of it to be able to quickly make a decision that's going to end up with you looking like you have a very homogeneous workplace that you may not have.
And I would say, as to piggyback on that, being very thoughtful in what you think makes somebody qualified for your company. So to Dr. B.A.'s point, we often try to put shorthand on it and assume that going to Duke means you're smart and qualified. That may not actually translate into that. You don't know how anybody got into the school they got into. Or assuming because you had this particular internship, you have X skill set, and that if you don't have it, then you don't. Whereas, again, like I said, I worked 5 jobs during undergrad. That taught me time management. It taught me how to negotiate. It taught me a lot of skills that have proved very helpful in the practice of law. And so I know that in actually looking at resumes, if I don't see your fancy internship, I will consider if you've gotten them in other ways, the skills that will make you a great communicator, a analyst, be able to digest information quickly, which you have to do if you have limited time, all of those things. So being critical about what are the characteristics and traits that really make you successful, and looking for those versus trying to come up with shorthand for it.
Yeah. Mike, can I just say that, girl, this is a wonderful team. I love it. You are so awesome. One of the things that you talked about is such an important piece of what happens in that process. Mike, you asked, how people are making the decisions, what do they do? We try to hire people like us. And what Yendelela just said was so important. She has a very different way of looking at those applicants because she has a very different experience walking in the door. So she can see things on that application that other people would not be able to see if they were students who simply went through school, being paid for by their parents, and didn't have to work, because their experience has been so different. And we view the world that way. We view it through our own experience. So if you're going to be intentional, part of what you have to do is, with the people who are actually doing the deciding, they have to do the work of figuring out, what am I really using for that criteria? How am I judging this different? And it's also, what she said is also one of the reasons why it's so incredibly important to have a diverse workplace. Because when you do, you're going to have much more than just the homogeneous view of what's going on. You're going to have all sorts of people. What she just told you was absolutely invaluable. Well, why would you not want to have that and have the benefit of what she's going to bring to that table, even though she may not look like the norm of what you expect. And in fact, the name alone, I have had students, white students, who have told me in class more than one time that if somebody had an ethnic sounding name, throw the application in the trash. And we already know, research shows that if you have an ethnic sounding name, you are 50% less likely to get a call back. That's amazing.
And you may keep this or not, Mike, but that's why I use my ethnic sounding name. My middle name is Michelle, and I intentionally use it to help change that stereotype, because I know I am a force to be reckoned with. I have done legal work for you. You know I'm good at it. And so I hope that by being good at what I do and having this name, that the next time somebody won't throw out a resume when they see a name that's not common.
This has been really great interaction, guys. I thank you. This is I think Dr. B.A. called me out. This is an ambitious agenda we have here, but this is going to conclude part one. And I think that the key takeaways that I heard are words like proactive and intention. That diversity is not something that it happens by itself in an organization. You have to engage, and there's systemic reasons for why that has to be. I thank you both for your for contributing today, and look forward to our next part.